So, Sam, it's perfect that you brought up Justin Fields there as a lovely segue into the things that we learned in week one. Because one of the things that I learned is that he can throw the ball, right? All offseason, we talked about the Jets leaning into the design run game, joking about how high their run rate was going to be. And they even made it look for a minute there like we were onto something when they ran on 3rd and 11 early in the game. But Mr. Fields did not just run in this game. He also threw the ball very, very well. Top 5 in EPA per drop back this week, top 5 in CPOE, that's completion percentage over expected, top 5 in success rate, and he had the second highest passing Sumer score after Matthew Stafford. He was 3rd in pressure rate, meaning he had the 3rd highest pressure rate, 50%, but he only took 1 sack. That is a 7% pressure to sack ratio. That's a good number. Offense had a 50% success rate on early downs. They clearly didn't win the game, but obviously it wasn't because of the offense, which scored 32 points and held the ball for 32 minutes. As Zach Rosenblatt pointed out in The Athletic, New York had been 53-1 when those bars had been cleared before Sunday's game. So I feel like there's a lot that we learned there. Yes, it's one game. Slow your roll, Lindsay. We have a large sample size relatively of him not being a particularly high-end passer. But one of the things that I have always said about Justin Fields, and I said it before about Sam Darnold, was that the environment was never great. He was never utilized in the way that felt perfect. We were put in offenses that put him in a position to highlight the things that were not his strengths, or more specifically, were his weaknesses, right? So in this particular case, we know he can run. But the fact that he's able to take the field in week one and put those kinds of passing numbers, I think is a very good sign for his potential for the rest of the season, and obviously for this offense's potential as a result.
My favorite stat in Sean Syed and Tej Seth's Stats and Scheme newsletter, which you can subscribe to now on SumerSports.com, was that he threw a high-end 31.8% of his passes over the middle of the field in Tanner Engstrand's coming from the Lions offense, and he was still able to achieve all those excellent passing analytics that you just outlined, Lindsay. And that's not to say, we were saying we were laughing about what their pass rate over expected, how much they would be running. He still had 10 designed rushes. This was like the Sam Bruchhaus Super Bowl game. It was beautiful. It was excellent to watch. It was an excellently called game from Tanner Engstrand. And he was very successful in those design rushes. And so the real question is, given the nature of the middle of the field passing game, is he going to be able to keep up that level of difficulty on his throws, and in particular, that completion percentage over expected? We know that the middle of the field is the 3-point shot in the NFL. It's a little bit more difficult, but it comes with big efficiency boosts and big plays. We've seen Ben Johnson take advantage of that and turn Jared Goff into one of the better passers in this league. If Tanner Engstrand can do that with Justin Fields, plus the addition of a 70% success rate, which obviously is aided by the naked boot, which no one even thought that Justin Fields could run on the goal line. And sure enough, he just jogs into the end zone, despite being, probably the number one weapon for them in the red zone. If they're able to add both of those together, this Jets offense is going to look really great. And moreover, for fantasy folks, it's going to open Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall up the
Yes.
same way it did this week.
Yes. Well, and notably, Breece Hall scored very high in our
Right.
Sumer score metrics. And I thought was incredibly interesting considering, at least within the fantasy space, a lot of discussion happened in the last month
Right.
about whether or not he was going to share that backfield and or be usurped by Braylon Allen. So
That's not even to say that they didn't get opportunities. Like, Braylon Allen got a lot of opportunities. Isaiah Davis got a lot of opportunities. Like, this has very much the capability to be an egalitarian offense, much like the Lions have been, where Jameson Williams some weeks is fantasy relevant. And then there's the studs, Garrett Wilson, Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then the running backs are very good and fantasy relevant as well. I'm going to be tracking the Jets very closely because they're doing a lot of things correct.
yeah, I thought that was really interesting, and that they did that against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. Like it wasn't like, we're talking about the Colts game and Daniel Jones and kind of going like, wait, because, well, at least I am, because I have expressed a ton of concerns about the Dolphins, and I feel like a lot of that game had to do with the Dolphins. This is a case where the Steelers defense is certainly not perfect, but like it's on a different tier
Right.
so
And we talk about first-time play callers. You try to come in with a plan, and their plan was to not run the ball to TJ Watt. Like, TJ Watt commands the side of the field. That's what he's known for doing. The Steelers wanna cut the field in half because they believe in Alex Highsmith, and they believe in, Hayward and the rest of that group. And they just decided, "Sweet, in the run game, we're gonna let them cut that side of the field off. We're gonna run behind our young tackles, our left side of our offensive line." It ended up being pretty successful. When you stick to a plan, often it works pretty well, particularly when you have a guy who was as hot as Justin Fields was on Sunday.
yeah. I hope you drafted him in fantasy because if he continues to play all season long and he plays like this with the rushing upside that is baked into that, like, that could be such a massive value pick. I have 0 shares of him outside of dynasty leagues where I do have him, so that's good.
100%. And Lindsay, this must just be the game where we were learning and learning. We were in the classroom,
Oh, what'd you
reading the
learn?
textbooks because a question that I had no no idea what the answer was going to be coming into the season was going to be what the Steelers offense looked like. Was Aaron Rodgers going to win out and we were gonna see the same kind of shotgun, pre-snap, quick throw stuff that we saw last, year, or was it going to be the Arthur Smith offense? I went back
Who's
and
in
looked.
charge here?
Exactly, who's in charge here? And I went back and looked at Arthur Smith's, year-to-year under center play action rates, and he is pretty flexible. When he was with the Titans that had Derrick Henry, they were under center and run and play action. When he didn't quite have the level of quarterback and young running back, when he was the head coach of the Falcons, it switched up. He was kinda more egalitarian. They weren't necessarily doing a lot of the under center play action stuff. Last year, they were back in the top. That is what they're going to look to do this year. The interesting part is Aaron Rodgers had a very high sack rate in week 1, one of the highest in the league. As a 40-plus-year-old quarterback, is he gonna be able to sustain that? And as someone who we have seen rattle the cage from time to time, is he going to be able to sustain the mentality of getting hit, especially if it comes out to what, at the end of the game, in terms of expected points added, ended up really being an average offense this week. They did not achieve the most. They got the W, but on a play-by-play basis, it wasn't that successful. And so, or at least, you know, imminently successful when you have that type of guy getting hit so many times. And so I'm really interested to see how this progresses. Are they just gonna sacrifice Aaron Rodgers to the Wolves, put him back there, turn his back to the defense, faking play actions, and gunning the ball deep? Or at some point, does this come a little bit more conservative to what Aaron Rodgers wants to look like?
I feel a little bit, similar to the way that I felt after Russell Wilson played his first game with the Steelers last year, where I don't wanna be Debbie Downer, and I know that it comes across that way, but, like, I just wanna wait and see. Like, I'm in a holding pattern, and I know that he felt and he said into a microphone that he thought he had showed the Jets that he could still play football and, like, proven them wrong, um, and which is
Check
why
the
he's
stat. Yeah,
so
you
likable.
got the victory, but check the stats, brother. Like, there is a box score.
Well, one of the things that I have on my radar to keep an eye on this year that statistically is a pattern when quarterbacks get older is their ADOT comes down.
Mhm.
If it comes down, and it doesn't actually always come down, I should rephrase that. But if it comes down, that tends to be a sign of something, and his ADOT came down. Last year, he had the lowest ADOT at that's average depth of target, by the way. He had the lowest average depth of target of his career last year. And obviously all of the other stats that support maybe a decline. And so I think that the Jets had good reason. Obviously, anybody who has listened to me talk about Aaron Rodgers knows that I agree with the Jets and think that they had good reason to maybe move on from him. But I am concerned about the fact that the average depth of target was, I forget the official number, I don't have it in front of me. It's like 4.3 or something like that. It's like 4 and change. That's a really low average depth of target. And so if that continues, and again, it's a 1 game sample size, that could be game planning, but it's consistent with a pattern that's already been established, much like we said with Cooper Cup, of a decline. Are we going to continue in that department? Is that a sign that maybe the arm strength isn't there? Interesting note. I keep mentioning Netflix's quarterback show, but in that same episode that I talked about earlier, Kirk Cousins talked about how he was hurt in this game,
Mhm.
and he was talking about the challenge of knowing in your brain when to fire, when the window is there, all that stuff. Like, you understand football, you understand the timing, you understand it all. When your body cannot do what your brain tells it to do, that creates problems because you're like, "Now," and then, "Oops, the ball didn't get there in time and it's a pick," or something like that.
Right.
So, as we evaluate whether or not the arm strength is still there, then that's something else that I'm keeping my eye on. Because Lord knows that, like, up here, that's always been a strength for Aaron Rodgers. Will it continue to be his friend, or will it
Right.
fight against the things that his body may or may not be able to do anymore?
Yeah. To put it in perspective, they were 31st in ADOT this week out of 32 teams. So
Yeah.
it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Something to keep an eye on. One of the things that I learned this week, Sam, is that we're going to see a lot of tight ends on the field this season, and I'm here for it. Sometimes three tight ends at one time. The Cardinals lined up with three tight ends 25% of their offensive plays. Sam, they had multiple tight ends on the field for over half of their offensive plays, 50.8%. And they were not the only ones that were that high. The Browns' primary personnel package in week one was 12 personnel. They ran that 50% of the time after using that personnel grouping on just 15% of their plays last year. And we're not done. Three more teams ran more plays than not with multiple tight ends: the Packers and Eagles, who did that 55% of the time, and the Steelers, who ran 53% of their plays this way. Like the Browns, they're way up in 12, only ran it 19% of the time last year. And that is not counting the Ravens, who were at 50% exactly. I think offenses are evolving as far as this position is going. I think we're seeing more and more athletic pass catching tight ends come out in the draft who can also block. I feel like that's a little bit of a cheat code. I think tight ends are being developed at a higher rate at younger ages. And I think all of this points to the continued production growth that we've seen in box scores in recent years. There were 12 tight ends this week who had 6 or more targets. Last year, week one, there were 3. Uh, 16 tight ends had double-digit fantasy points this week. Week 1 last year, there were 5. And yes, I put in waiver claims for Harold Fannin, this week. So there's that. But I do feel like, the tight end story is one that will be really interesting to monitor as the season goes on.
Lindsay, I am so glad that you're highlighting this because this is something that I've had my eye on for years. We've started to see these folks who are extremely personnel diverse kind of pop up. And a lot of the times it was just switching guys in and out. And we saw that a lot with like a guy like Sean McVay, who's typically going to run 11, but you're going to see players in different places and you're going to see them do different things. I think that was kind of the beginning. And then when guys like Ben Johnson and guys like Todd Monken and the Baltimore Ravens were able to get these big tight ends or fullbacks involved in the passing game, Kyle Juszczyk and Kyle Shanahan, obviously another example of that. It just makes planning for an offense a lot more difficult. Now, the comeback would be, why wouldn't you just want a wide receiver running routes rather than a fullback or rather than a tight end? And that's a great explanation. Like that's something great to hit, but it can't be, you know, you don't have to establish the run to make people fear the run. And when you're coming out in 13 personnel, immediately everyone is going to fear the run. Were the Cardinals the most effective in the run game this week? No, they weren't. They were about average. But nonetheless, it was able to open up the pass, particularly in the red zone. It was able to open stuff up for Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. And when you're showing a front like that and you believe in your guys like Higgins or Tip Ryman or especially Trey McBride, who when it really comes down to it is kind of playing wide receiver functionally, but just has a different level of body type, and thus you can kind of motion him pre-snap. It just opens up a lot if you have that level of guy.
It feels like it, like, disguises a little bit more of what your intent is on that offensive play, right?
100%. It's very difficult when you have a 6'5", 265-pound person to not think that person is gonna block. And moreover, it's really difficult when that person can catch the ball like Trey McBride. It's really difficult to not run out a defensive back to go cover him. And that fear in a defense coordinator's mind, I think, is enough to get over the realities of the situation, which is, yeah, sure, you could probably trot out nickel out there, but then what if they do motion him in at run? And I think coaches' neediness to be able to answer every question, and that's just the reality of talent in the NFL. There's a limited amount of talent, brings these personnel diverse teams a little over the average just based on whoever they have.
Love it. I love this week was so fun learning all of the different things. What else was felt particularly memorable for you?
The thing that I had to figure out was who was getting the Liam Cohen bump. We
Yeah.
saw Liam Cohen, as we discussed with Sean, turn a
Was there
rushing
going to be
offense.
one
Exactly.
even?
Was there
Yeah.
going to be one? Of course. We saw him turn what was a putrid rushing offense into a really good rushing offense. So what I learned was that Travis Etienne is going to be the Bucky Irving this year, Lindsay. That's what I learned. We saw him have an excellent, efficient running game. We saw pretty much all the same stuff we saw last year from the Bucks being utilized, including Brian Thomas Jr. on a beautiful end around, which thus opens up other plays for Travis Etienne. And then come on Monday, Tank Bigsby is out of there. He's traded for a 5th and 6th round pick. A lot of people could be saying this is the Bashal Tootin time. I'm sticking with Travis Etienne. That's what I learned.
Yeah, I think that that was a very interesting observation this week also, how good he looked in this offense, and I'm wondering now let's do a quick aside, help me with my fantasy. Because I think you could still maybe try and grab him. You could make a trade for ETN and hope that maybe somebody else thinks that it's a little fluky. So if we agree with what you're saying and that this is sort of a product of environment and that this is a great situation for ETN and what we saw in week 1 is maybe likely to continue, then, do you think that that is likely true? Like, are you willing to push your chips in to a degree on that?
Here, I'll argue for and against it. Here's the
Okay.
argument against Travis Etienne. The Panthers' rush defense last year was really bad, and they added a bunch of young guys. It could be that they didn't know what to prepare for with Liam Cohen, or at least didn't prepare for what it would look like. Obviously, there's a level of uncertainty moving to a new team, and thus a team which was already underpowered in the run game defensively just got overpowered by a lot of good talent. The case for him is that he had like 50% carry share. A lot of that was eaten up by Trevor Lawrence scrambling as well. And it just seems as if they're going to continue forth with him as the number one running back, given how explosive he has been during his career. Remember, explosivity was never really his issue. His issue was fumbling and kind of the down to down passing back stuff. That was always Travis Etienne's issue. I don't think that's going to be an issue underneath Liam Cohen. And I think it would be really interesting given that a lot of people stick to that ADP. You could get him in the later rounds. It could be really interesting to see if you can steal him in like a flex first. He's on someone's bench trade. I think that'd be an interesting way to go about it.
Totally. I'm gonna have to figure out what I'm willing to give up for that. All right. I've got a lot of fantasy related things to do for the rest of the day. Before we get to that, one more thing that I learned is that maybe the Patriots are not ready to be like the 4-win to the playoffs team just yet. I mean, there's still so much time, but they look like a team that maybe we got a little bit higher on, we being the collective we, than they're ready to be just yet. They look like they've got a lot of work to do, particularly. And one of the biggest questions that I had kind of circled is like, this is what we're going to learn from them. What I want to learn is who their pass catchers are, right? Like they just did not have anybody that came to the forefront that could be trusted consistently last year. And I walked away from this week wondering if I actually had an answer to that question yet.
It's tough, especially when you have a young quarterback. I mean, to a certain degree, we were able to see Jaden Daniels turn Terry McLaurin into an all pro last year when a lot of people were asking the same questions about him. I don't have a good answer, and I don't know what it's gonna look like, really. I think that's the real question is, can Mike Vrabel and Josh McDaniels construct something that makes sense for Drake May? I wasn't really overly impressed with Drake May himself at the time, and you combine that with pass catchers you don't really love, and that causes some problems. Who I was impressed was Will Campbell, and we know that Mike Vrabel wants to run a power game. And I think if Will Campbell is able to develop over this year, perhaps we will see kind of the Panthers trajectory within this year, which unfortunately didn't look great in week 1, but the Panthers trajectory where an offensive line starts to come along and thus makes things easier for a quarterback who doesn't have a lot of weapons. As a result, I kind of agree, Lindsay. I think this is going to be a little longer build than we'll see. I'm going to continue looking on if that defense can prop them up. Weren't really looking great either. I think this is gonna be more of an average team than kind of a jump team, and I think that's primarily just because I trust Mike Vrabel, and Drake May's athleticism, and obviously can have those big spike games, but you gotta deal with those downside games with kind of the whole pass group, and it seemed like that was kinda what happened in week 1.
Let me ask you this, and I'm putting you on the spot, and I don't wanna do that in order to say, like, "No, I'm not excited about this person." But Kayshon Boutte? How do we say his last name?
Kayshon Boutte.
I just wanna call him Booty. Okay, so he had a pretty good game, over 100 yards, right? Like, this was clearly the pass catcher that had the best game on this team. By the way, they targeted 11 different pass catchers, which is another thing that sometimes is the sign of a healthy offense. In this case, I wonder if it's not the sign of a lack of a target hog, right? Like, you want someone that's your guy, and the fact that nobody really emerged and they just kept, like, spreading the ball around, in this case, I think might be a negative sign. But Kayshawn, 103 yards, a catch rate over expected of +27.5. EPA was +8.4 yards per route run, 2.5, right? Like, it was a good outing for him. He's not a big name. He's not somebody that we would even have really considered to be the guy in New England this year, but his last 3 games of last year, he also produced, in 2 of the 3 anyway. So now including this week, in 3 of his last 4 games, he has 5 plus catches on 7 plus targets and 95 plus receiving yards. And so I'm wondering if there is a chance that you think that he might actually be the answer and that we were just looking in the wrong direction? Or do you think that that is unlikely to consistently be the case?
Yeah, I think you gotta look kinda at the whole picture here. And a lot of the discussion with him was about like some of these big drop games. Like last year with the Jets, he has 2 drops, Titans drops. Like I'm almost putting him in like the Quentin Johnston category to a certain degree. And I think, frankly, I believe a little bit more in Quentin Johnston, but it is good to see this type of progression there. I just don't know if he can be a true target earner the way that we really want to see someone do with Drake May. Ideally, that's Stephon Diggs for them. Weren't really able to see it, didn't look fantastic. But I think I put him more in like an ascendant wide receiver 2 perhaps lane right now is where I would put Kayshon Boutte.
I know that ideally it's Stefan Diggs. I have a fear that with Diggs, we might be looking at a Cooper Cup like age situation. I don't know, because I think that there was some evidence his last year in Buffalo that maybe a decline had already started, and you can work around some declines like the Chargers did with Keenan Allen before he went to Chicago and just brought, the depth of target down but I think something is not. I don't think Steph Diggs is the same Steph Diggs, that we think of as Steph Diggs. I think and it's clearly coming off the injury. Our evidence last year with guys coming off injury was that they weren't the same for a while. And so maybe it'll just take a little while, but also at his age, I wonder if there is a ramp back up to where we want him to be. And so I was keeping an eye on like Demario Douglas and will he take that next step this year? Is Pop going to be the guy? Or is Kyle Williams, the guy that they drafted, going to be the guy? And I mean, obviously, it's still so early and anything could happen, but I didn't see evidence of any of that. And from a SumerScore standpoint, um, Kayshawn was their highest scoring receiver, but he still came in at 60 in the ranks. And so that's obviously not where you want your number one wide receiver to be coming in at. All right, anything else, Sam?
I think the final thing you just gotta hone in on, and this isn't necessarily a takeaway or a learning, but what JJ McCarthy are we going to see moving forward? Like the first half, it looked really brutal. Negative plays, sacks, picks. It just didn't look good. Second half started to keep it moving, started to find completions, and best of all, had a quarterback design run touchdown. So I think that's something I want to keep an eye on. And very similarly, Bo Nix is a guy that I want to keep an eye on because the entire story moving into this year for Bo Nix was could he continue to limit negative plays and expand his role in the offense? His role in the offense expanded, the negative plays came along with it. I don't think the Broncos are going to be able to survive what looks to be an extremely tough division with the Chargers having Justin Herbert play MVP ball, and obviously the Chiefs as well, and Geno Smith looking pretty good as well. I don't know if they're going to be able to survive offensively in some of these games if they start to get shootouts if Bo Nix continues to make negative plays.
Yeah, interesting there. I agree with you about Bo Nix because that's like a step back at a time when we were expecting a step forward. Again, super small sample size, plenty of time to turn it around. The JJ McCarthy thing, like first time, like he's never done it, right? Like first time in the NFL. I fully expect and write off any kind of struggles that you have. And I like that he built on it and kind of got settled a little bit and that the arrow pointed up as the game went on. So we'll see if he continues to build on that. Were you impressed with Caleb?
I was not. I was
Yeah, I
not
wasn't
impressed with Caleb.
either. And I really wanted the Bears to look very different, and I highly suspect that any Ben Johnson effect would take a minute to kind of, establish a rhythm and get on the same page and stuff. But I went back and I watched his lowest scoring Sumer score plays, which is a rad thing that our engineering team has built out, that we have the ability to kind of like have links to the video there, and so I can click over and watch what, like, okay, this one we scored poorly, like, what happened, and I noticed in all of the plays that were red, which is, like, the lowest, um, he wasn't under pressure, it was just kind of like, he wasn't sped up, is what I'm trying to say, because one of the things that I really wanted to keep an eye on this year, I really want his time to throw to go down. I want him to establish a little bit more pace in the pocket, and actually, weirdly, his time to throw in this game went up from last year. It was, like, over 3, and so we moved in the wrong direction for a one-game sample, but in this case, he was on these throws, they were just misfires. It wasn't, like, hand in the face and any of that, like, he had time, and he just didn't make the throws, and so maybe those are why those were the lowest graded plays, right? Because it was those were the ones that were on him, and I'm sure there were other examples, and I know there were other examples where he was sped up, but, I didn't love seeing him have time in this many opportunities that I watched where he didn't make the throw.
I think the thing that troubled me the most is it felt like things were there offensively. And to a certain degree, given the level of talent and the level of talent they've added, kind of know they were there, especially over the middle of the field. We just saw him either decline to make the play, which Troy Aikman called out several times, or miss the play, as he did notably across the middle with DJ Moore. So the first drive or the first 10 attempts, everyone was getting really excited. But what I was thinking is like, this is the Caleb Williams offense. And we've seen Caleb Williams run the Caleb Williams offense in National Football League. And it ended up in exactly what happened in the second half. Sacks, balls not getting completed, confusion. And it didn't feel like the Ben Johnson offense. It felt like people were running the Ben Johnson offense. It just didn't feel like Caleb was on the same page. And so despite them moving the ball down the field, despite him making big plays, I I don't wanna say I don't know if he can do it, but it certainly seemed as if it didn't look like what it looked like with Jared Goff. That's all that I'll say right now.
Have you looked at the week 2 schedule yet?
I have. I got the Chiefs Eagles really circled because that's gonna answer a lot of questions because I think they're gonna get after Jalen Hurts. I don't think we're gonna get Jalen Hurts scrambling all over the place this week. Obviously, I was excited that Justin Herbert was scrambling all over the place, but I'm interested to see what that defense looks like. And I'm really interested to look like to see what an Eagles defense, which has some massive holes, particularly at the cornerback position, matches up against the Chiefs. Now they have Jalen Carter back.
Ooh, we've got Steelers Seahawks, and I say ooh because I'm interested to see the Steelers offense go up against the Seahawks defense.
Another game where we will learn a lot. Kind of the opposite as it pertains to play action with the Seahawks. Didn't run a lot of play action. I think this is another great learning game because we're going to get some heat coming at Sam Darnold from both sides this time. We're going to have Alex Highsmith and we're going to have TJ Watt coming at him. I wonder if he can maintain at least the level of success. He was 10th in Sumer score last week. He was 10th in Sumer score last year over the aggregate. Obviously, that came down at the end of the year. I want to see if he can maintain that level of play given all the changes with the staff there, and also given that he'll be facing a pretty good defense.